a certain point, like I'm grateful to the institution for getting me to this place because the undercommon is birthed out of the institutions and the institutional knowledge that they had gone through. And so I was struggling with this idea that the undercommons must exist within the systems that are established and are coercive and inherently colonial because there's that line. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This Doug, I was like, I'm leaving a birthday party, and I brought the undercommons with me, and I was just like, maybe I'll like, yeah, I'm terrible at parties now. I was like, maybe I'll just talk to some people about it, like see what they think. No one was. I was at the grill, so I was like, maybe like if someone comes up, like, what are you reading? I'm like, hey, you should read this book. It was terrible. It was terrible. I was like. Oh, hello everyone. Welcome to a Mutant Manifesto. Hello everyone. Welcome to a Mutant Manifesto episode 28. This is Joshua. I'm here with Jackie and Carson. It's Full House Day, so it's really, really nice to have us all together. And we are going to be talking about The Undercommons by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. For me, it's a long-awaited piece of literature that informs a lot of the way that I think about things. And I just wanted to maybe level set a little bit, just to focus on the fugitivity aspect of this, because the Undercommons, the title of the text, is subheaded with fugitive planning and Black study. So this engages heavily with sort of Black radical thought, Black political thought, etc., and sort of how to, how does it feel to be a problem, but answered in a way that is a little bit looser. So yeah, I just wanted to maybe frame the question that I want to start with, which is, does the Undercommons rely on the like overarching system, the governance, politics, etc., in order to exist? And I think I came to that question through that word fugitivity and the Maroon societies that get referenced throughout this text. And for listeners who don't know what Maroon cultures are in Black study, that is just enslaved or soon to be enslaved people escaping the that infrastructure and forming alternate societies outside of that, and they're rife with like diversity, their own cultures, their own societies, and politics that are mutually opposed to the hegemonic colonial system and enterprise of the transatlantic slave trade and beyond. And so when you bring it into the literary context, you have this sort of larger tapestry of fugitivity that involves sort of formerly enslaved or enslaved people seeking freedom and liberation. And Moten and Harney in this text are trying to bring that into a more modern sense of this, that's less about escaping captors in a physical chattel slavery sense, but more so engaging with this on a political sense. Let me ask the folks, do you all agree with that reading to some extent, or?
Yeah, to me, like one of the central questions of this book is like, is like trying to, it's like, it seems like the impetus is trying to decolonize the the starting points of all these assumptions that we have about like academia and study and like knowledge production and everything. So it's like, but it seems like it's a decolonial project that challenges a lot of assumptions about what it even means to be anti-colonial or whatever. And I feel like that's kind of the thing that's difficult to grapple with sometimes is like, are we defanging the project by trying to decolonize it before it has the, you know, and you know, but this like changing the paradigm in which one is evaluating something, even, you know. So it's like it's trying to decolonize and deconstruct things at a kind of fundamental level. So it just seems like it's a decolonial effort, essentially, that's particularly interested in questions of like academia and like knowledge production and you know, debt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe like there's, to bring it back to that context, like ownership, right, and like exclusionary hegemonic relationships with that system, and that system that I think in some ways we have learned to rely on. Like, how do we decolonize our dependency on those systems? And I maybe I want to offer one last thing before I sort of open it up more broadly to this idea of like where Black study and Blackness comes in. Study is something that I think we'll get to in much more depth later. But in this text, Moten mentions Frank B. Wilderson, Frank B. Wilderson III, who is sort of the father of Afropessimism. And I know this has evolved in theory well beyond this, and he's definitely written a lot more essays that I have yet to read on this topic and how it sort of transforms into this more modern era that we're in. But there's a concept that he lays out that does not distinguish the global or international understanding of Blackness in conjunction with slaveness, and that Blackness is sort of this antithesis or antithetical concept to what order is, society, etc. To maybe oversimplify just the butt of the joke. And I have a little passage here on page 13 of Afropessimism, and I'm not going to stay here long. I just wanted to give you like how this opens up, like how Afropessimism opens up, and then how it evolves into the broader sense of like how Moten brings us all into this context. Is that he says, talking about himself, that he was the foil of humanity. Humanity looked to me when it was unsure of itself. I let humanity say, with a sigh of existential relief, at least we're not him. To quote Saidiya Hartman, the slave is neither civic man nor free worker, but excluded from the narrative of we the people that affects the linkage of the modern individual and the state. The everyday practices of the enslaved occur in the default of the political, in the absence of the rights of man or the assurances of the self-possessed individual, and perhaps even without a quote-unquote person in the usual meaning of the term. And so to bring it back to Moten, we take this concept or understanding of Blackness, slaveness, into the larger, broader tapestry of society, and we are all subjected and existing in a liminal space that is crushing us between and trying to reorder us as antitheses of a thing. So this can include like a poor person, etc. The way that we engage with that liminal space puts us in this sense of fugitivity, and the Undercommons collectively gathers us and gives us more leverage points. And I think that's where study comes in. That's where we learn from what is left in the gaps and maybe mobilize that to the benefit of broader people in general that doesn't necessarily have a capital attached to it doesn't necessarily have the systems of debt, as Moten puts in here, to apprehend us and then reincorporate us into the system, because what we are learning is that our worth is actually not something that can be quantified or calculated when we don't participate in the system of hegemony, colonial exploits, and or the capitalist machine that demands time, energy, and human capacity from us.
Well, I feel like just to tag a couple topics there that I think relate directly to the Mutant Manifesto's like arc. And I think like why I'm interested personally in like, I mean, you know, one of the reasons I'm interested personally in like investigating kind of this Afro-pessimist lineage potentially in the coming months with this podcast is like, I think that there's a really interesting situation that comes out of Afropessimism that is related to this idea of like humanism. And I think that like it's another way that we can like look at the relationship between the human and like colonialism. And it's interesting because I think that there's like a neoliberal kind of like defense of like human rights and kind of stature towards human rights that's supposed to like that kind of misses a lot of inherent divisions that are kind of irreducible between like categories of people. But then like, so on one hand that's kind of rejecting the category of humanity, or like the promise of humanity on those terms kind of is like an attempt to like bring that liberal imagination down to earth. But on the other hand, there's also kind of like this kind of dismissive leftist angle that I've heard people being voiced, where it's like they're like all of this like critical theory can get so heady and like alienating, you know, and like that doesn't matter. All that matters is like concrete, like join a union, fight for better wages. It's all about concrete, like getting more and more access to property, which I think also misses a little bit of this like decolonial movement that comes from this critique of the human, and therefore the critique of the entire project of colonialism that spread this humanism to like the world. And so I feel like, yeah, I feel like actually there was an interview that I was reading really quickly that Moten did in 2023 for Nordic Art Review. The interviewer asks, the interview says like, what you bring sounds post-humanist, while in most contexts we are still claiming humanity. There's a sort of tension in the fact that the community demands representation and your thought is going in a different direction. How do you position yourself in these terms? And he says, paraphrasing, he is usually against the idea of, he doesn't like the prefix post because it's hard to actually be really after something, he says. But then I wanted to read I wanted to read a passage real quick that he, just to clarify this like post anti quote unquote human stance. I think it really is really helpful for our project and for this Afropessimist thing that we're investigating a little bit. So, quote, so these are the two different reasons why he's... Okay, yeah, quote, it is got two elements to it, in the sense that we have to confront two things. One is, again, the way in which we have to come to understand our oppression is that it takes a form of denial of our humanity. Human beings are the agents of that denial, which ought to give us pause about claiming the status of human. Because if humans can be slave traders, if humans can destroy the environment, if humans can do all the bad things that humans do, then maybe we ought not to jump so quickly, right? Humans do some interesting things too, no doubt, but it is very unclear if the good stuff outweighs the bad. And what it has produced in a situation that we now live in which humans are not only destroying as many other species as they possibly can, but human beings are also very quickly destroying the capacity of our own species to survive. So, like, what does it mean to claim humanity as some sort of, like, bastion? Yeah, and then back to the quote. Then we also have to confront the fact that the very idea of species itself is a human invention. From our framework, it appears to have some intellectual justification, but of course, in every other modality of thought, that would not be a sufficient way to actually assess its value. In other words, if something is only true from one perspective, we generally say, well, that's kind of suspect. Yeah. I don't think that lions and tigers have a sort of idea of species. It's not that lions and tigers are all good. But yeah. So like, unquote. And then to paraphrase the rest of it, it's just like, you can actually from a technical standpoint also very much problematize the idea of species and therefore the idea of like the human as a stable category. So yeah, those are the two different. Then those are like two critiques that I've am constantly trying to also articulate in this project, because it's not like you're trying to be like, oh, it's not like a misanthropic take necessarily, but it's like kind of like trying to make things more concrete and realistic, while at the same time being like the ways that people dismiss things on the grounds of it being realistic is actually also kind of missing the point. Like you need a little bit of that like fantasy as well, that little to be able to like get where we want to go, I feel like.
Yeah, I just, there were two things in that really resonated with me, particularly on the idea of the necessity of order that feeds into the hegemonic system, right? Like by creating strata, we try and like condense everything. And then when you were talking about dismissal on the grounds of realism or whatever, by creating, to use maybe one of Moten's terms, by creating this relationship with the shipped and the shippers, or enslavers in many different ways, in all ranges of that word, we're trying to recreate a system by like creating a set of axioms that we are all to abide by, which is the human, which is like this strata of species, etc. And to reference our aperitif episode, right? I saw something online that was saying that like the way that French cuisine is designed is to portray dominance over like other creatures. And I don't know how true it is. I didn't look that up, but I'm just saying that like, okay, we talk about like the cruelty of like French cooking, and we have this strata of like, as humans, we therefore have dominion over the beasts, and as with dominion over the beasts, we can do what we will with them. What can we therefore do with people who are considered non-human? What can we therefore do with people who are considered adjacent to humanity, if you have a disability, et cetera, et cetera? So like by confiding in these strata, we are also reifying the systems of oppression that are so pervasive that we need that questioning, as you were saying. Like we need to say like, okay, if being a human means I am able-bodied and therefore have these qualities and traits and can live in the world in the way that like I guess the overcommons would like accept, then therefore I am diametrically opposed to everything outside of that, and I need to in some ways continue to reify and like represent, to use a Moten term again, myself as something other, like, or something as the subject, and distanced from the other.
Yeah, I think that even like Moten's like use of this represent, like that itself is kind of a another way that we see another juncture between his work and like the work of Mutant Manifesto, because simply by reiterating, like, okay, first of all, it mutates the word by repeating it, but it's also, that's what he's also calling for, is this thing where like you present yourself again, and in representing yourself, something new emerges, right? So it's literally like this like stance towards mutation, right? Stepping into something.
Yeah.
There was actually this interesting thing. This is reminding me. There was like this riff that he went on, I think in the interview section of like chapter 7 or something, where he's talking about the call. Like, okay, so like there are moments in music where people will be like, play that drum, they'll be calling you to do something that you're already doing, but they'll say it in a way that is both practiced and also when you say like play that drum or like guitar, or whatever else you're doing like in a song, you're emphatically asking the person to improvise in a way that is both practiced and that they're already going to be doing, but you imbue it with this kind of like spell of like spontaneity and like greater than the sum of the practice and like originality. Something new comes out of that and something emphatic comes out of that, and that's something really interesting that is related to this like mutant project, I feel like.
I wanted to hop on this a little bit because I think as we get in and start digesting this idea of performance, like as for those of you who are a little bit who don't know, like Moten also is a musician, does jazz stuff, and also talks like at length about music. Like a lot of his projects, like his larger projects, are collaborative. One of his like solo projects is called In the Break, and that really does focus on musicality. But to come back to the performance aspect that Jackie is mentioning, like this gets us closer, I guess, to his mutual debt concepts, right? Like there's a way in which in the moment of performance, in the moment of improvisation, and also the like ask to like the participation from the audience or whomever who is the listener, could be another performer as well, to improvise in this moment, brings this like organic connectivity to the scene that is happening in real time. And with that, I think we enter into the study realm. This is where we are like bending this mold of like, okay, what can we learn now? Like now that we have already established, we know what is established, where do we transform? Where do we evolve? And I know that feels a bit vague. So I think I can try to rein it back in by saying that you're not offering someone in this moment like mastery over a thing. You are encouraging, I would say, like a spirit of newness that could potentially progress the interaction forward. Was that clearer, or was that maybe a bit still a bit convoluted?
Because it might help.
Okay, please,
like,
please. Because
something that
I
I'm
was
just
trying to frame study as something, but go ahead.
because like I was just reading about the meme theory of like genes as being the basis of evolution, like something that's replicable, but then because it is replicable as a structure is what allows like the mutation. It's just this interesting thing of like it's almost like a meme to say like guitar, like
Mm.
and then what you're talking about, like, there's like always this play between like a structure and a non-structure, like improvisational, even like to improvise, is within some sort of like structural framework. You're on an instrument, that has a
You have to know the notes, you have to know the scales.
structure. Yeah, I mean, it's so I just think it's pertinent to like their thinking in this book is like this structure and then like this obscure, so, like always fugitive, always like I don't know, like it is like this. Maybe it's intentionally ambiguous, or maybe I just don't know what it is yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, but if thank you for that, because that brought me to it's always referential, right? So like having the structure itself can bring in other potential structures that can reshape and reform something, right? Like having that basis, is that kind of where you were going, or am I misinterpreting? Because when I was thinking of study, it's like, okay, you bring in the like in the jazz context, when someone is doing a jazz solo, they can bring in any type of context that fits within the mold of the song, if that makes sense. So I think a maybe chronically online example would be someone on sax is now about to stand up and do a solo in the middle of like some jazz standard, and they bring in the like Mario Kart theme of in some way, or like some other musical reference. But in bringing that reference into this environment, there are so many concepts that are like adjacent to that it pushes this moment into a different direction, and therefore we are more nimble intellectually, and therefore if we are dealing with if we take it out of the music context into maybe a more political context, someone bringing in expertise from the like rail worker fields into a think tank space might be the key to understanding a different system that might circumnavigate either the hegemonic pressure, like if we think of jazz in relation to classical music or whatever, like that structure, like breaking the structure and running away from that structure, but being kind of orbiting around it in many different ways, still gives us a sense of newness and possibility. If I'm going to call back to the question of like, does the Undercommons rely on the sort of overarching Overcommons system? Like, if I am therefore orbiting but perfecting a system by establishing something that is always, oh God, I didn't want to say always already, but always somehow like ingrained into it, you are denaturing it to form a new pathway, if that makes sense. Like it is both innovation and degradation, because it is using the tools at its disposal to dissolve and reform and become more plastic, liquid, or whatever, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff just about like conservation of like how I'm understanding it is conservation of like spaces where this like social production experimentation happens, because that like that's always trying to be broken up and then appropriated by capital as like, you know, break up social production so that you can profit off of something everywhere, you know. Yeah, I'm curious, like I was thinking about it when reading that chapter on like debt and credit, and the chapter after that one too, of thinking about this like thing that I think Marx calls like the general intellect. It's kind of just like, I don't know, it's like the good stuff that is always always happening, like regardless, that then gets captured or appropriated, privatized, I guess, for the like. That's why I don't know, it's hard to think about capital in those terms of like social terms. And maybe this goes back to what you're saying that maybe before we started recording about like, you know, kind of this it's like this post worker, post Fordist, like theorizing about what the hell work and production even is, you know, like whether it starts in the 70s, 80s, and then continues on, like this line of theorizing about that things just become so much more messy, like the relationships between actual work or worker, boss, product, like commodity, like in the more orthodox like Marxist or materialist terms, it's like things get really messy. And I think that they draw a lot from that, you know, they draw a lot from like not just Afro-pessimist stuff, but like what's the word, autonomedia or something, like it's more like that Italian kind of post-worker movement of like Antonio Negri and Ifo Berardi, Silvia Federici, like people like that, thinking about, and like Mark Fisher a little bit too, like all of this. Yeah, I'm trying to say like this process of capture of something that is like a social product that's produced, you know, in, I think what they're saying is it's like produced in the Undercommons, and then like it's always then like tried to be broken up through a process of governance and policy. Um, but those things aren't just top down, that it's through this creation of a self, of a subjectivity, of a white person, of believing that you're white, or of believing that you're a person at all. That's kind of what they talked about. And then like this interview that I had watched, or it's not even an interview, they're just having a conversation and like drinking beer, but
You touched on so many things because I was to bring it back to Moten, or actually Fanon, and Moten, when he talks about like the idea of lysis and like disorder being like something that dissolves the fabric of like what we understand that hierarchy to be, and then we then move beyond that.
Yeah, can you try to spell that out a little bit?
Yeah, so
like listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm trying to figure out where to start on this page. It's like 133 in the book. He's like, the claim that Fanon makes about the demand being neurotic. This is like sort of the demand on people, being neurotic in an already existing conception of psychological order or normalcy or whatever. And that's something that he says in Black Skin and White Mask, in quotes, is tied to the sort of recognition that anti-colonial movement would necessarily be one that would tend towards complete disorder, total lysis. And then neurosis is tied not just for the fact that from the standpoint of the sovereignty, the demand of sovereignty's destruction makes no sense, but also to the fact that the demand is spoken in his crazy language, in the crazy costume of the one who thinks he is the one. So the idea that like it is understandable to the thing that is being destroyed that the components want it to be destroyed, if that makes sense. So the worker who is by conception maybe like supposed to be subjected to the boss is saying, I want to destroy this. I don't need this. You need me more, like in that same sort of like communist Marxist type of lens of like, hey, like you need me more than I need you, and I can create something outside of you. For that to be articulated does not compute in the systems of order that we have. And so the thing that is new, the thing that like Undercommons, or at least my reading of it, the thing that is sort of presented by the Undercommons is that there is a primordial soup that can therefore be manipulated because everybody understands that it's the fundamental parts, if that makes sense. Like the system's components are now in harmony with one another rather than sort of mutually opposed and or antagonistic towards one another.
So let's talk a little bit more about what the Undercommons actually means. Like, so like I think that they sketch out that like there's the commons of like, okay, so what would the commons be, right? The commons would be like the academic space. Like you're there in the commons with your other peers who are studying, you know, this rigid form of study, that is like, you know, studying for tests, studying to get a good job, studying to you know, under a teacher who themselves is required to like manage a classroom and like police and regulate people's intellect. The commons is a place where you share ideas on that level and share ideas that are functional within like a capitalist society, that are functional within a you know, colonial regime.
Sorry, I just want to also add government to the commons.
Governmentality, exactly. The commons would also be the right, like you go to the board of like the education board has like an open meeting to the public that you can go to, or like everyone has the right to voice their opinion about like the political candidate of the year or whatever, or you can run for mayor, like, and then you're like you going door to door talking to people about how you should be mayor. These are all commons. These are all the commons, right? So then what he's talking about is the undercommons, and it's kind of this like, it seems to me like almost like a it's like a fairy world, because in a certain way, like you have to be in. He like Moten and Stefano are constantly inviting the reader into the undercommons and saying that it's open to whoever wants to go there. But if you walk the wrong way, then before you know it, you're bringing the overworld, the colonial world, into the undercommons, and therefore you're not there. So you have to like know how to slip into it, which means like being mutually invited and allowing and allowed at the same time, And so you have to kind of decolonize yourself in order to even. That's why the fantasy element is necessary, because if you come in with a scientific mindset or whatever, then you're already colonizing it. You're already like bringing the overworld down, which means that you're not there. So it is something that like he really spells it out, but it's also fantastical. You could also talk about this in like fantasy language, I feel like. But then there's a lot of really concrete ways that we could talk about this. Like, so what do you guys think about that? Like, can we spell out any more about like what the undercommons is? Like,
trying to resist to like bring answers. I think something that helps me locate myself and what the undercommons is like the pass card that you get when you are like either you belong to a gym or you are employed by something in a building. You are now deputized by the system to use the resources of the system. But in your imagination, you can do you now have authority that has been sort of deputized to you that you can use for whatever means you want. So the undercommons could also look like, hey, I know that my building doesn't do anything with their rooftop. I'm going to, like, me as the arbiter of this situation, I'm going to unleash this rooftop so that we can all go upstairs, congregate in the confines of society to do something that's beyond that. So to think, strategize, and reestablish something that has nothing to do with the system that we are quote unquote abusing, right? So I think the undercommons is the underlying / like the like not underhanded, but the undercurrent maybe of the mechanisms of society that the farther you go up, the more distance you are from actually seeing it run. The boss can't do everybody's job and needs to trust that the employees are going to work in order to keep the machine running. But there is excess. Like if we're in the capitalist context, there's always excess, there's always surplus. That surplus does not necessarily need to be reintegrated into the same system. That surplus, which is also sort of the debt of your labor, right, can be given freely to other people, right? Can be manipulated towards a different gain. And this is where bring it back to like the Maroon society, like the fugitivity aspect of it. It's like, while we have liberated ourselves from a system, we are now all like together as one. We owe each other trust. We owe each other a non-material form of debt, because I trust you, you trust me, and together we stay free. Versus if I trust you and you don't trust me, you could give me up. You could put yourself back in the system by, giving the fugitive back, right? Like to re-incarcerate somebody or something like that. But the urge not to do that and the sort of possibility outside of doing that, right? Like thinking outside of the box is what creates this fantastical world of the undercommons, which is just all of that which is imagined in antithesis to the the system that we all operate in or have to live in or are forced to live opposed to.
So like, yeah, I think this is key. Okay, so like, let's think about, okay, so if the Undercommons is a space that it can enter into, and Moten and Stefano offer this idea of study, that is very, it's essentially, am I right in saying that like study is essentially kind of chilling out with people and like doing something together, but in a very chill way that is it's more like letting the realizations come to you as opposed to like looking for answers, like looking as opposed to like looking for specific answers to specific issues. You're more like jazz, like you're improvising around something and you're like playing with ideas and seeing what comes up. I don't know, so like that's like the Undercommons version of study, which like again in an institutional way, study means like you're extracting information and data for specific purposes, whereas the thing is like, so what happens when you start liberating yourself in these ways and you start to become like, okay, am I part of the Undercommons now? Sure, that means that I can just chill out. I've decolonized myself. I no longer am beholden to these systems of oppression that are like motivating my actions. I feel like there's a temptation at this point. There's a temptation at that point to be like, okay, so that means I can just like do whatever I want, and that means I can play Magic the Gathering constantly and like listen to podcasts and not worry about anything. But then that's where this idea of debt comes in, because it's true that I can do those things, but it's also true that what he's trying to sketch out is the situation of social debt that is also part of the Undercommons, that is like motivating, honestly, probably more from like a place of love or whatever, like a Cornel Westian love, where it's like you are beholden to the other entities that are there in the Undercommons with you, not in a way that is like irrevocable. It's not like the overworld debt, but it's like a different kind of debt where it's like you are then compelled to do something beyond that or just study it. That's what compels your study. That's what compels your investigation. That's what animates your potential action. Even is this like, yeah, there's this moment at the end again where Moten sketches out this anecdote about his grandfather giving people rides. Like he would give people, he had like a car where a lot of people didn't have cars. And so people would ask him for rides all the time, and he'd give them like hour-long rides or whatever. And he'd do it all the time, and young Moten used to ride along with him. And you know, whenever the transportee is being let out of the car to the destination, the person would always be like, "All right, what do I owe you?" And Moten's grandpa would always be like, "No, you kidding me? Like, get the fuck out of here! Like, you don't owe me anything." But on the occasions when the guest in the car did not actually ask how much they owed Moten's grandfather, you know, they'd be let out of the car, no problem. But then Moten's grandfather would say to Moten, like, don't you ever be like that. Basically being like, you need to ask what you owe somebody, but then you're not actually going to extract the payment. You need to offer that and say, like, I recognize that you did me a favor. Like, you know, I'm indebted to you. And then, but then, like, from there, there's a social bond that's formed. Like, you owe each other in this way that is, like, additive. Like, you have this debt mutually that is actually generative as opposed to extractive.
I think I like, and I want to add some more context to there as well. I think, so there's a part where Moten says that, like, he talks about the performance and the learned response of that like the act of asking and not like the like maybe the enactment of entitlement to this type of service is important. Like the idea that there is a performance going on in the car that I'm offering something. This person might be in debt to me, but I am therefore sharing the debt, because there's also a sense where, like, the person who's getting the ride might not even like ask, but like next time would just leave cash on the seat. Like that was another part of this. So it's like, I think, and this is where I struggle a little bit. I think that study in relation to performance requires the understanding of like how one like enacts mutual debt, because like in the linear sense, Moten's grandfather drives person to location. That person is therefore indebted to Moten's grandfather because they received a service and did not have to pay, and that debt was absolved, right? So indebted, but like not quite indebted. They live in a community. Like this is where the Undercommons comes in. They live in a system together. And because of that system, there will be an opportunity for that person to offer themselves similarly, maybe not to the same degree, but similarly to Moten's grandfather. And because of that, like interlaying, like that the development of trust, development of like a sense of a shared lack of resources, you therefore have like a basis for from which you can say, oh, well, like these are my people and these aren't my people. This is how we are all operating under like almost a dependency to the system. Like the system is crushing us all, but I have an apple and you have a pear, and we can split these things and share with each other. I rhymed a little too much on this call, but I think study in this is both like we're chilling and there are like we live our lives, but I must learn how to live outside of the system, and therefore that's part of study. I also think that part of study, if it were to be pushing like specifically on the political, specifically on the anti-colonial, is like where you learn the gaps of the system's establishment, and you can return to this space, the Undercommons, and bring forth a new way to solve a problem. And I hesitate to say that because I don't think Moten's saying in this text that study in the Undercommons is meant to solve a problem, but is almost a reaction to the problems that we have, if that makes sense. And like that's the performance part. Sorry, to bring it back full circle, where it's like we are performing this idea, the mutual debt idea, and therefore we can lean into study. So at first is debt, second is performance. From performance, study is like, you know, blossomed and maybe more becomes like forms and is more malleable.
There's some parts that I think would be helpful that they just say it kind of straightforward in some spots. That's it's not credit we seek or even debt, but bad debt, which is to say real debt, the debt that cannot be repaid, the debt at a distance, the debt without creditor, the black debt, the queer debt, the criminal debt. And then they say debt is social, credit is asocial, debt is mutual, credit runs only one way. And then to talk about study, I like how they said study is a bad habit. You know, it's like study is going to keep putting you further and further in debt. But what's like what we're trying to pull out of that is you actually want to be not just in debt, but bad debt, which is actually to say real debt, which is actually to say good debt, you know. So
yeah,
like the debt that's completely undesirable, like from the framework of the creditors, which is the framework of the plantation, which is the framework of capitalism. You know, it's like,
I mean, Jack Halberstam did the intro to this edition that I have here of this book, and that makes a lot of sense because Halberstam's like queer art of failure is very much interested in like and Halberstam in general is very much interested in like doing this for like queerness, essentially, of like here's all these institutional things that people try to strive towards, and that kind of captures a lot of like critical theory and ideology among the left or whatever whatever interested parties that still is trying to strive for. It affects a sort of institutionalization of the parties that it's advocating for to be liberated. And so like you need to kind of undo the end point. You need to undo the tautology of it all. You need to like get outside of the frameworks of redemption that like are offered by the system of credit or whatever, as opposed to debt. You know. Oh, did you?
No. I was just gonna. No, go ahead. Credit is something very interesting, but I know that I will go on another tangent of mine.
Good credit. Now I'm about to apply for Home Depot credit. Now I got a $35,000 credit. We got a temporary receipt. All I gotta do is show her to the cashier, and she gonna let it slide through. All I gotta do is show her to the cashier, and she gonna let it slide through.
The word mutant was mentioned one time in this document, and it was in this part where they're basically like listing all these different kind of like tenets of like they're doing like a numbered list of like they're trying to like do it in bullet points, trying to do the thesis in bullet points. But so on page 52, it's like number 10 is, whom do we mean when we say there's nothing wrong with us? The fat ones, the ones who are all out of compass, however precisely they are located, the ones who are not conscious when they listen to Les McCann, the screamers who don't say much insolently, the churchgoers who value impropriety, the ones who manage to evade self-management in the enclosure, the ones without interest who bring the muted noise and mutant grammar of the new general interest by refusing, the new general intellect extending the long, extra-genetic line of extra-moral obligation to disturb and evade intelligence. Our cousins, all of our friends. Unquote. So, like, yeah, like, I feel like that actually ties to what you talk about, like, memes and stuff a little bit too, Carson. Just, like, the way that this document is written, there's a lot of, like, poetry to it that does, like, you know, repetition of phrases catches on new meanings, and you know that is the muted noise and mutant grammar of that's trying to refuse and evade intellect, right? It's like, so like there's something beyond just like logic, and then this kind of ties to this question of like, what do we mean when we say logistics? Like logistics is one of these like villains of this document. So like, I don't know, but I was a little bit, you know, of course, confused by exactly what was meant by logistics. But it is also very interesting because I think that it's also tied to this idea of the shipped, which is, you know, very much latent with, like, I think, quote, never being on the right side of the Atlantic. This idea of, like, post this global trauma of, like, slave trade and colonialization, or colonialism, like, there's like this irrevocable nature to the debt that we are in, and this moment of like being, actually there's kind of this thing about hapticality, where it's like, you know, you're being shipped in these containers, and then you're like you're there underneath the surface of the boat. You're in the darkness of the hold of the ship, right? You're being shipped in a container, a dark container, but then you're like next to other people who are also like you're touching other people who are also being shipped, and like that touch itself, the like current of like one person touching another is connected to this Undercommons thing. Like that itself could be the current of study or something. I don't know, but like, so like, how does this relate to logistics and like debt versus credit?
My swing, and please everybody rein me in if I'm swinging at the wrong object, but I think this relates to it. Like, I'm going to try to go from abstract to concrete. Like, if we're talking about touching each other in the hold, like what you feel is kind of like abstractly and also concretely, like what you feel dictates like what is true. Logistics is the ship itself bringing you for a purpose, but what you are feeling and all the things that are happening in the hold actually is this, like, it is not only part of your unmaking, but part of your remaking as you enter into this new phase, right? Like, being shipped presupposes that you have been removed and then commodified and then sent off, right? And so I think logistics and the resistance of logistics is resisting the order within which, like, the phylum or whatever status that you have and that you're carrying. And so I struggle with how to get to study from here, because I feel like study is so inextricably linked to the aftermath, this sort of like, we have now been transformed and therefore we are like learning anew, if that makes sense. But I think that there's something about how one self-actualizes is always in antithesis to the systems that have been established to break us apart, or to like put us in containers and therefore give us like slots to fill. And as you're escaping that slot, you are understanding that other people are escaping their own particular I don't know, slots and or their purposes as logistics and planning would have for them. And you can glean from what may have been perceived as their benefits and amalgamate them into a new thing. Does that make sense? Or am I still on a rambling?
No, it does. You know, I feel like there's like the containers of contemporary world are, I mean, give me some grace here, listener. Of course, I'm not trying to compare things like, like direct. I'm not trying to like do a literal comparison, but like, I think that the containers of the contemporary world are like, I think they're like really prevalent, and it's like there's I think that like words and okay, basically, so like analytics, like your data, right? Your data is like an example of what is articulable and perceivable by like almost the overcommons, right? Or the like systems of regulation and capital that the extract, this would be the analog of like the ledger on the like trading ship, where like you have a list of the goods that were the cargo that was like put onto this boat, what went overboard, and then what made it to its destination. But like that ignores the materiality, like the experience, the internal experience of the cargo itself. It was dehumanizing language. Yeah, so like, but like all these things have an internal experience. So like, and I feel like that's the realm of maybe the Undercommons, which is like, again, it's like it's what's interesting is that like to think about it in a contemporary context, like a present context, we all have access to the Undercommons simply by sitting with ourselves and contemplating, because that cannot actually be tracked like fully. Like if you're being creative and imaginative when you're thinking about things, daydreaming, that cannot be tracked. Yeah. Whereas if you're being logical and conclusive and using pre-existing dialogues and dialogue trees, even your rhetoric can be tracked. Like the dialogue trees can be mapped out. So like if you're not being inventive, if you're not being creative, then you are being you are fitting pretty neatly into, I mean, the way that your thoughts themselves can be kind of like articulated and perceived by the overcommons kind of regulatory system, which like doesn't preclude you from the undercommons. But like there is something beyond that like is a space that will always be quote unquote ours, I don't know. It's like it's really hard to articulate. It is really hard to articulate. Like you need to. I don't know. It's hard to like.
There's two things. There's a point in which like Moten describes the Undercommons as a perpetual experiment. So that kind of liberates us from like the rigidity of like the space of the Undercommons. But I also want to bring up this idea that you're bringing, like being able to be tracked and that relationship to fugitivity. I think that, I don't know, and you can skip this if you don't want to engage on it, but like necessarily in this context, but it feels like it talks about why I think the Undercommons is inextricably linked to the Overcommons or what have you, because we live in the anxiety of the destruction of the Undercommons, right? In my mind, like as I engage with this, it's like there's always like the Undercommons thrives off of the mutual debt, the mutual understanding, collectivism, and a re-mechanizing, and you're not trying to create order. Like you're not trying to create like stasis in the Undercommons. You're actually just trying to like always survive. You're always formulating in a sense of like lack, right? But that lack is caused by what is hoarded by the Overcommons, the establishment, the government, etc. And so something that feels terrifying about what you're saying is that like the way I am tracked is the way that I am trained to communicate, because in order to enter the Undercommons, I therefore have to acknowledge the thing that I'm escaping from and relearn how to like formulate and create a new sense of being self, enter all that is like true and or seeking truth to some extent. And let me not use true. True is like a very dangerous word. I think seeking liberation is more comfortable, where we are seeking freedom and like in many ways justice as it formulates itself, where this individual is beholden to me in the same way that I'm beholden to them. But because of that relationship, I am in a state of perpetual peril, because the system is always there and it's always got, to use a Matrix reference, like the robots are always on the surface. They're always going to be trying to find the fugitive people outside of the Matrix. And it takes one simple disgruntled, person in Zion to be like, hey, like, I would rather pretend to be eating steak in a penthouse. And here are the codes to get into this Undercommons. Like, sorry, I'm following the Matrix and trying to use language into Zion.
It actually maps pretty well, but yeah.
I know it's I don't like that. But it like give them the guy in the Matrix. Sorry if you haven't seen it. Ruins the situation because he's trying to give the codes to the robots so that they can infiltrate and destroy the literally fugitive society, right? And so, but living in that fear and living in that trust is necessary for this perpetual fugitivity, which is necessary for this perpetual sense of study, right? We're constantly learning about ourselves and learning how to circumnavigate an evolving system of capture, I think. No, like if we are inherently shipped, we already have our dog tags on us, maybe our tracking devices, and to extract them is a painful process. So yeah.
There's also like I think something that I find interesting is that like basically I think this is kind of the real like crux of like what I'm dealing with, and like again with this project, I feel like it's all kind of trying to answer these questions, but like so like basically to what extent is it okay to chill out and like because like to be and therefore be a little bit like Zion, and to what extent is it you have to really unplug and be like, I'm gonna do this whole like, because like it seems like what Moten has like a lot of ambivalence here, because it's like it's not like you're trying to say that you need to go like be a radical. You don't need to like give up your position as a professor. You don't have to give up your position as a student in this like academy that's been funded by like he says like the only good like relationship to academia is like one of theft or whatever. Like you're just supposed to be like stealing resources from the academy, but like that doesn't mean that you should say like, oh, we're anti-academy. That doesn't mean that we should say like, let's burn the system down, all these things. So I guess like when it comes to me as a reader of this, it's like, to what extent is this just saying that like go ahead and keep playing Magic the Gathering Arena and like doing your podcast and that's study. Whoa, there you go, that's study. And I think, but that's again where the social debt comes in. But like,
Is it?
yeah, I guess that just is a decision we all have to make. I don't know, like,
Because
but like, what about like having a beer with your friend? Like, there's something about the like looking at it as play or something that seems like it's instrumental here.
yeah, can we let's use the model of like having a beer with your friend, because I feel like I'm not good at Magic, so I don't understand.
Yeah.
Magic gathering.
I mean, I don't know why I'm bringing that up. I guess just because of what I've been doing, but it's like technically, I think that part of the under like you could do the Undercommons thing by reading a text, by like reading a book.
But it has to
And you could.
I think it has to be with or like with someone. Like you're entertained.
But-
yeah, good.
Okay, this is interesting because I thought that like maybe I misunderstood this, but I felt like there was a part where it's like if you're reading poetry or something, then you're with the writer and everyone else who was reading the book. So like you can have an academic like it doesn't have to be in the moment. Like you can have like by reading other people's take on the text, then you're in that community with those other people. Everyone has read the text. Now like you're sharing that space with them in a non-linear, temporality.
I agree.
But okay, but yeah, so like that means that like listening to a podcast, could that not be study? Could that not be this kind of thing?
The way that I've tried to conceive of this is that if I give the example of having a beer with a friend, my friend could be anywhere in their lives, and having a beer with my friend could have untold ramifications or positive experiences. But the main thing is we together are forming a relationship and a bond that in like to, I don't know, catastrophize, like in a bad situation, at least I will have thought of my friend and like hope I have like a thread connecting to them, right? The Undercommons to me is a call to constantly be ready to iterate and not necessarily a call to destroy the system as it is. So like having a government job or living or being a part of the academic system, maybe it means that like if you are like inherently a part of academia, you have the keys to give access to education to a lot of people, and a lot more people at a higher like stage than at a lower stage. And by virtue of living in society, by going to your local bar, you can be like, oh, I read this crazy article, let me just print that off for you and I'll give it to you. Like you don't have to be a part of an institution when it's hidden behind the paywall of JSTOR, right? Or to continue with this example, I'm in DC. I'm bumping shoulders with a lot of random people who might have a lot of random government jobs. And we talked somewhat about this in another episode, but it's like I could like feasibly share a beer with someone who will say like, hey, oh, I'll give you an example. There's someone who went to my pottery studio. I don't know if she still goes because I haven't seen her. She's like goes on the days, but she worked in like the FDA and was telling us about how the difficulty with calling like or talking about red whatever that red food dye or whatever, then like that link to
Red 40.
red 40, right?
Red 40 gang, rise up.
They know that it's connected to cancer, but they can't actually, there are certain like stipulations that need to be in place in order for them to actually claim this. So that's why they can't do this. And part of it is a result of lobbying, right? Lobbying against this chemical that they're putting in food and that I have been putting in candy and things like that for years, right? She tells me this. I'm now sharing this on a podcast. Like, I think that is part of the study. Like,
right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of almost the hapticality, because you have to be there in the space. That's the haptic part, like the touch part. Like,
yeah.
It doesn't mean like touching people. It means like you're in a space that can't be tracked digitally. Like, you are there, and then like it gets transmitted to the rest of the Undercommons this way, and it's untraceable, unregulatable way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like, oh fuck, I forgot. It's like it's rhizomatic, right? To like try to bring a little bit of Deleuze in there, where it's like coming from different points, but it creates like this tapestry that is like above ground, but like fully like underground. Like that's where the networks are happening. Like almost
mycelium.
Yep, mycelium. That's where I was going. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it's under. I mean, mycelium is a good metaphor, but I mean, yeah, rhizome, mycelium, Undercommons.
Yeah.
I think you could probably just say that they're like in this, they're against policy and like a participation in this fantasy of like a white civic life, and that study and planning is like the conservation of what is good, and like the conservation of spaces that actually allow for experimentation, like social experimentation, which is what actually creates the change that is real, you know? That isn't this sort of like isn't like this trademark change and trademark hope that is always like this very political, campaign based. Like, I think maybe that's actually an interesting antagonism to this podcast project, was like kind of the critique of change and the critique of constant change as being something that creates contingency and precarity, as opposed to something that mutates into something better. That it's actually change can also be, negative. The burrowing down into something that is this conserved, good, like fugitive black operation, and it's broken up by change, by imposed change, and that's what's I like.
But I mean, I feel like that's what almost necessitates a constant changing of the fugitive. Like the fugitive has to be constantly moving because it's like constantly being encroached upon.
Right. So that,
like, you can't have a safe house for very long. You know what I mean?
Right. It's on the move. Yeah. That I just thought it was like, but at the same time, like so it's on the other side too, though. Like it's policy as what do they say? It's policy as correction, constant correction of like those who need to be corrected, saved, restored, whatever. Also, that is constantly recalibrating. And that's where the data, that's where the surveillance and all of that comes in, where it's like, who cares if like, at a certain point, it's like, who cares if we're being tracked? Like, it almost becomes something that's just like paranoia, but it's like, oh, but reason tracking is happening is that then you're going to be like fed, not just on your phone, but like in so many different realms, you're going to be fed like the same sort of limited, striated versions of everything we're talking about. That it's like the same sort of, Jack Halverson also talks about this, of like the same disciplines, the same disciplinarity, not just the self-discipline, but if you're a student, you're going to be going through the same disciplines, same disciplinary tracks. And like, to be like what I'm thinking of as good study or to be a good student is to always be against that, is to always be fighting the disciplinarity like of the institution, also of thought, like, and I think this is where it gets hard though, because it's like you're always deconstructing that, like, that's where it's hard, where everything becomes so liquefied and like the postmodern kind of sense. But I liked how they actually were like, they like in these chapters they were like conservative in like a nice way of like, you got to conserve what is good and what is already like happening. You got to conserve these spaces. And it's not that planning is one action, planning isn't, what did they say was a funny thing? It was like, planning isn't fishing, planning isn't dancing, planning isn't teaching. But, oh yeah, Josh, you already said this. The ceaseless experiment with the futural presence of the forms of life makes such activities even possible. So, like, without the planning, without the spaces, like, those things seem to just, like, exist or coexist, like, and for those activities, for the fishing, the loving, the dancing to be possible, you have to have the spaces for it. And what's always like, then we run up against policy that's always going to be breaking up like spaces like that. And maybe I'm thinking too literally, but like breaking up spaces, and then capital always wants in, it always wants to get in on the action, and like then it's destroyed, and then it's always this like, so, or maybe not destroyed, but it's mutated in a bad way, it's changed in a way that maybe is, I don't know, it's no longer what
it's like the vampires and sinners.
Yeah, like the liberation is absorbed, right? Like that's exactly what you're saying, because it's like it is always being sought, right? Like there's a component of this text that is like everything that we create is the thing that the system is hungry for, right? Like it's the innovation that the system cannot create in and of itself. So again, back to the reliance, right? The system relies on the undercommons to try to siphon off of, right? To get that innovation, that like addiction to change that you're talking about. But then I think there's a distinction between how change operates, how planning and preparedness to flee operates, right? Like the maybe first tenet of the undercommons is to always escape the grasp of the overcommons, right? This term that we've created, right? Like to constantly escape this commodification process that is not only enticing but ever present, right? Like, and am I still following you, Carson? Or no?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. We're all following each other, I feel like, but
Yeah, keep going.
Right, because okay, there's a part on page 82 where he says distinguish between the desire to correct and the desire to plan with others, ruthlessly seek out the fearfully beware militant preservation, and an undercommons of means without ends of love among things. So it's like the undercommons being perpetually mobile, being sort of like anti relax and stasis and create an NGO that therefore fights for this or X, Y goal. You can, like, you are evolving and you're constantly running. And this is where the relaxed part comes in. It's like you need to incorporate chilling into this, because there is no stopping. This system needs to continue running away from the order, the like breadcrumbs of excess that the capitalist engine wants to constantly devour, right? So it's like if capitalism wants, or if the system generally wants change and wants to evolve and wants to maybe change as improvement and reifying and representing, as they say, the establishment, while in our wake the undercommons creates this, the undercommons demands that you create art and let it just like you just throw it out. Like you're always in debt to each other, and you're always going to be in debt. You're always lacking. So as you maintain this status of fugitivity, you are compelled to always lose the sense of possession, because the thing that you have is the thing that will be consumed, and the moment you cherish it a little too much, the moment you want to keep it in stasis and like hold on to its comfort, because that's kind of what we're trained into, that's the moment that, I don't know, the hounds come. That's the moment where the safe house is taken over. If we're going to bring the Sinners example, it's like once you have an established place, there is a location for the vampires to go to knock on the door and say, "Can you let me in?"
I guess, well, spaces, places like to have multiple, like to have a network, a rhizome, like a rhizomatic, because then it's like, I don't know, but like with surveillance, it's really kind of crazy, like to try and even. But that's our job, That's our job to try and like think about that. I think there was a funny thing. I don't know if I just read little snippets of the interview at the end of the book, and Fred Moten said, like, kind of, I think, touching on what Jackie's talking about, just like, do we just chill and like play, and like that is like enough. But he said this funny thing about like and what was, I can't even remember what it was in reference to, but he said it's better to bother someone to death than to die. And I took that as like a literally like a door knocking, like I'm gonna keep telling somebody about something. I'm gonna keep bothering them about something, because that's better to bother them to death than to die. And that kind of, to me, is like, yeah, I was trying to say before, I think they're like against, policy as being the like body to be the thing that we should invest in order to move. But like you should, like you are socially, like all this is very social. And I think that they also said like we're actually like communist about communism, we're like actually, really it's not even an investment, it just is the fact of social life, and this mutual indebtedness, because yeah, I don't know, there's all these random things that Fred Moten has said which like are popping up for me. And he was talking one time, I was watching something that he was talking about this old movie, but can't remember what the movie is. But the line stuck out to me was that like that he just kept repeating was like this guy who had done bad things, who had like harmed people, that like somebody else was like basically like, why are you still friends with him? Or like, because there was this other guy who just was still his friend this whole time, even though this person was like, doing bad shit. He's like, all you've got is your friends. And I just like, that line stuck with me for a while of like, yeah, like to deputize yourself into this, a constant cop, whatever, of like, oh, people should be incarcerated, not just in like a physical prison sense, but like people should be, canceled, moved out of like, and I know that this is getting into something that's whatever, controversial, but like I think that it would be interesting to hear more about, like, I probably just have to read more about it, but like they also said something about like we're like, we're real in our abolitionism, like yeah, I kind of lost what I was getting at, but I think like a lot of it was towing this line of like a divestment from certain things, but a real investment in like a true investment, not just because like you should put your energy towards this, but you are factually indebted as other people are to you, because that is what being alive in a world with other people and other forms of life is. And I don't know, that was all really, really beautiful. And yeah, it was reminding me of this tweet, and then I'll stop after this. But it was this tweet that I saw a while ago that was being shared by, and it was from someone who, Joshua Breon, I think, was the one who wrote it, who has a podcast too. It was like critiquing like this thing that got thrown around so much of like, you don't owe anybody anything, like none of us owe each other anything, and then like it was like, actually we owe each other everything. Like, I don't know, I love like these. Yeah, I mean, for me in my life, it's been so real lately. Like, it's just been undeniable. Like, I don't know. So, and it does make me want to do more of that myself. Like, you know? Yeah.
I know I've been yapping a bit, but if we divert from the text a little bit, I think that's what makes it. No, I'm not going to fully divert. I think that's kind of what the study is, right? Like, there's a certain point in which all of the systems of order that we understand, these like laws that we are supposed to, like social laws that we're supposed to enact and like defend, to project a sense of good. Like, to go back to Jackie's like original example, like there's a point in which the system itself like conflates, and this is about the human, conflates what is and what ought to be, right? Like the human and what ought to be human, right? And to then leave the text a little bit, it's that realization that, you know, doing this thing right now, like instead of, oh, I should be out there marching, or I should be out there like creating some sort of thing to, you know, produce, this is actually the thing that matters. Like, it kind of dissolves away the threads of society that, at least in my mind, like the way that I try to live with this philosophy, and like as I engage with this text, it's like at a certain point, like it's more valuable to me to like give $1 or $2 to Angela when she shows up at Showtime. It's my local bar. I haven't seen her in a bit, but like, and be like, all right, like I'll chat with you. I know you're not going to acknowledge me. I know you probably don't remember me or my name, but like that is when I feel most real. Like, it's not me going to like my fucking desk job, sitting here clacking away at keys. It is the idea that I'm just as much indebted to her as she is to me, in the sense that like, to be particularly crude about it, like it's people like Angela and other people experiencing homelessness that like keep my rent low. Like, and I'm not saying that like I'm to manipulate that, like not in a hierarchical sense. It's that we live in a tapestry, and my, like, I have to acknowledge that I'm indebted to the nature of this place in order to like subsist here. Like, all of the things that I'm able to enjoy are because of other people, and that expands well beyond the material things, but more so that like the more I can lean into um social interactions, being with other people, taking out the extra steps, and pulling people into a system that does not value the credits and debts that put numbers and maybe even like strata to the things. Like, I'm always going to do the thing, not because I am owed something in return, but because like it is the thing to do, and that's what makes life worth living, you know? Um, but yeah, I'm trying to think of a way to wrap this up, because we have been chatting for a bit. Jackie, do you have any points? You've been nodding a little bit, but I don't want to.
Well, yeah, no, I think that you guys both kind of articulated this thing where it's like, essentially, I think that there's, okay, I guess like the, you know, Flying Lotus, Kendrick Lamar, Never Catch Me is coming up here. So basically the conceit of the song is that there's a few, like, death is capture and life is fugitivity. And there's a dance between those two things. So, like, death is inevitable and yet not present. We are alive. And there is something even beyond biological life, I think, that also is alive. So that's what fugitivity is. It's something that actually is it's a magical dance, you know. Yeah, so I feel like and then another musician was talking about this idea that, like, we're up against endless stillness and endless stasis. And the only antidote to that is to make things. You just have to keep making. You just have to keep anything that you make, anything that you do with love or with intention or anything that's like creative is one more is putting off that capture. So like I feel like that central conflict is played out through colonialism and through like the capture of our modern like traps, but yeah, like, you know, I feel like, you know, so that's the I don't know, I feel like those are like ways to kind of make it both like a dire thing but also like readily, the thing is like readily accessibly like interactive, like you can just like, I don't know, it's like, yeah, I feel like the legit the rigor of planning and like study can be rigorous and playful at the same time, and it can also just be kind of whatever you like, I don't know, it can also just be, I don't know, it's like not a grand thing, but it's like, yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, like, we have to just acknowledge that the Undercommons is a part of resisting order, and like study is everywhere. You cannot say that one person isn't learning because they're not learning in the right way. And I think that like what you're saying, Jackie, is like, yeah, like when you are sitting on the riverbank, ostensibly doing nothing, that is still study, because like what you learn from being in nature is something that you can take back to the Undercommons, and that only happens because you are tied to this network of the Undercommons. And so, yeah, like the doing nothing, the entertainment, the actual gleaning of books, like the Wilson Center is closing, and I brought a bunch of people because we all like we're going to loot the Wilson building together. And now all of those books are in our network outside of the grasp of the government and like enterprise. We didn't talk specifically about politics there, but that was study, I think, because we all were in the system of like, oh, like there are things that we can take advantage of here, and like nothing can be taken for granted. And I think what order would suggest is that the things that aren't quantifiable, the things that aren't like filling the ledger, the things that aren't systematically distributed in a very specific way don't matter or become excess. We can resist that in the Undercommons. And yeah, I think that, I don't know, if anything, engaging with this text, I'm just going to put the stamp of approval, is the study, right? Like, I think we're doing that. And that's what I love about this concept and like the things that I'm tackling with. And I know for listeners who might have been hungry for more like specifically like Black study parts, I think there's always something still there, and I encourage you to talk to us about it. With the manifesto, I thought that maybe since it's bulky now, we can start actually creating subheadings for things, and then
Yeah, I was
like
thinking the same thing.
yeah, like if we can start engaging with it in a way that is like, okay, this is like the mutant appendage of blank, and then we're going to talk about that or like improve what that concept means, right? So I know we talked about the humans like here, but like is there like a through line human undercommons? And then I don't know, textually speaking, this is the use of footnotes and other types of things. So it becomes this sort of like circular document. And maybe that's me putting a little too much thought into it. And I don't know if that resonates with you, Jackie, but it's just like there's a way in which, as we start parsing it out, things become constantly referential to other things. And it becomes this amoeba of like, even though this section feels separate, there's a footnote that brings us back to you know, the Warcraft 40K stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah. I feel like there's that I like that a lot actually. I think one of my projects that kind of honestly is like was kind of a seed for this project was like what was it? It was called Monster Text, and it was like supposed to be like an autobiography kind of, but it was like all hyperlinks. So like the idea is that you read it, and you click words that then branch off into different sections. So like for example, we could do that with this like after the fires, how will I know how will I know to leave what's dead? And then like you can click the dead part, and then you would go to a different part of the poem where it's like, maybe in that section we have like the mutant spirit lives among us, like in thought and body, blah blah blah, and then like you can click one of those parts, and that'll bring you to a different part.
Mm-hmm.
But this idea of just like it not being a stable thing, it's like a thing that you have to navigate yourself based on what's drawing your interest.
Yeah. In thought and in body, no one, not two, in sky and seed sown, we dream of shadows to love through and hold their callous hands, shaping change in the nether pool from breath to breath, and coming up again and again, seeking vistas of freedom. We embody a haunted perspective and study the chaos. Thank you all.
Yay! That sounds.
We're back.
There's a recording. Trill marked the terror of being valued. The bottom confirmed without signaling live and let. Tapped and tight. Footwork and finger work. Needlework and noodling, comping and camping, how that solo put together. See us tip past meaning, light, lit up with an extra side. See? You can't say, see by flash in movement, see that call? Is that the new thing? Has new shit been brought to light? Man, see? Turn noise out of fuzzy head. falsetto bottom, see the error of being valued. Say, make me see it again. Repetition without a pulse. When the pulse is new in every instant, still be pulse. They be drinking and whatnot to the music. I had to wait until the picking was good. The smoke and everything, it's not a concertized thing. Can there be anything like a concertized thing? I be drinking and whatnot to the music. I be drinking and whatnot to the music. Whatnot to the music. What's not to the music? You had to be fighting not to play in these clubs.